Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of my murder mystery series. However, this episode isn't going to be a murder mystery, it's actually a solved murder. So this is the case of Junko Furuta, a 17-year-old Japanese girl. Junko Furuta was a 17-year-old girl who was abducted, and she suffered 44 days of hell before death finally relieved her on the 4th of January 1989. Junko was born on the 18th of January 1971 in Misato, Japan. This video contains the horrific details of what happened to Junko, and it may upset some viewers. Who was Junko? Junko was a Japanese girl. She was nothing like a normal teenager. She never done drugs. She was acing her grades in school. She was just your typical good teenager. She was anything a parent could have wanted, and this should not have happened to her. So one of the school bullies, Hiroshi Miyano, had asked Junko out on a date, but Junko respectfully told him no. However, Junko was the only person to ever turn down Hiroshi, and he did not take this lightly. This boy, Hiroshi, he was a known affiliate to the Yakuza, and the Yakuza in Japan at this time was a very, very well-known gang, and the Yakuza was known like worldwide for their ruthlessness and what they done to people, the torture that they went through. So yeah, he wasn't your typical nice boy. So on November 25th, 1988, Miyano and his friends were wandering the town with the intentions of robbing and raping some local girls. However, they seen Junko cycling home from work on her bike, so they decided to make this plan, and Hiroshi told his friend to go and kick her off her bike and then run away. Hiroshi Miyano was standing by, making it look like it was coincidence that he was there, and he ran over to her rescue and decided that he would help her and drive her home after the attack on her bicycle. But little did Junko know, everything was planned and she just fell right into their trap. So Hiroshi Miyano, he had taken Junko to a nearby camp and he raped her. Miyano had also told her about his connection to the Yakuza and told her that if she done anything, tried to escape, that he would kill her. So then Miyano then phoned up his friends and bragged about raping her. So then Miyano took Junko to a hotel and further raped her again. So his friends that he called was Agura and Watambi Yaushi. So Agura told Miyano to keep Furuta in captivity so they could all join. Around this time as well, the Yakuza had also gang raped another young lady and released her from her care, her captivity. This night, Miyano at around 3 AM took Junko to a local park to meet up with his friends, and when they got to the park, the boys had found out Junko's home address, and they threatened Junko, saying that they would go to her home address and kill her whole family. So then they decided that they would take her to Minato's house, one of the boys, where she would be held for the next 44 days. Junko's parents were getting worried then because they hadn't seen her for 2 days, so they actually called the police and a search party had taken place for Junko. So out of fear of being caught, the boys had told Junko to phone her family and tell her parents that she had run away to a friend's house and that she was safe. So whenever Minato's parents came to visit the house, they had made Junko pose as a girlfriend to one of the boys so it wouldn't look suspicious that they were holding her captive. But after being at the house for a while, the parents knew, and it was apparent that Junko was not one of their girlfriends, but they were so scared of Hiroshi's connection to the Yakuza that they didn't report it because they were also scared for their own life. So Minato's brother and his family was aware of the whole situation with Junko but just never done anything about it. So for the next 40 days, Junko was held captive in the Minato residence where she underwent brutal torture. Each day living inside this house was a day of hell and unimaginable suffering, pain for Junko. She was humiliated and she was kept naked most of the time during her captivity. She was raped by over 100 men, and each of the 4 boys had raped her more than a total of 400 times. It was estimated that she was raped by 12 different men in the one day. As if raping her over 400 times wasn't enough, they also done a lot more to Junko. In total, the boys had beat Junko, they had starved her, hung her from the ceiling and used her as a punching bag. They dropped barbells on her stomach, and they also whipped her and poured hot wax on her eyelids. They also forced her to eat live cockroaches. While this wasn't bad enough, they also forced Junko to drink her own urine, masturbate in front of all the boys. So raping her wasn't enough of a sexual assault, that they actually forced her to masturbate to please the boys. And while they were beating Junko, they had forced Junko to sing and dance. They had also inserted foreign objects into Junko's vagina. They had inserted drink bottles, a hot iron. They had also put in an exploding firework into her vagina. They put scissors in her vagina. They just put anything they could get up inside, they even put chicken skewers up inside of her vagina. Due to Junko's internal organs being subjected to so much trauma, it ended up that Junko wasn't able to urinate, control her urination or her feces, that she just became so incontinent. When she did become incontinent, the boys were just so disgusted and they weren't sexually satisfied with her anymore, so they increased her beatings. They beat her more instead of just letting her go. They had burned her vagina and clitoris with cigarette butts, and they had also poured hot burning wax onto her eyelids. And not only that, they tore off her left nipple with pliers and pierced her boobs with needles, sewing needles. So Junko had lost consciousness due to the severity of all these beatings. And when she did become unconscious, they stuck her head in a bucket of water so she would wake up. When her body was found, Orman C bottles, which is drink bottles, was found stuck up in her anus. And due to the severity of her uterus, it should have been impossible for Junko to get pregnant. But when her body was found, she was actually pregnant at the time. Due to the beatings, her face was just so unrecognisable. She did not look like herself at all. 20 days into Junko's captivity, she was able to get one of the boys' phones without them seeing and contact the police. However, the boys seen her and caught her, and they rang the police and says it was a fake emergency call. Then because Junko tried to escape, they then tortured her even more as a punishment. They poured lighter fluid all over her legs and feet and set her feet and legs on fire. And due to these burns, her legs was weeping and bleeding so badly that she couldn't even stand. Junko could handle no more with her hands because her hands had been beat in so much with weights and her fingernails was torn off. And because she was so badly beat and assaulted that the boys had forced her to sleep out on the balcony naked. Now bear in mind, this is November, December time, so it was freezing cold, it was winter. One of the kidnappers had told the court that Junko's legs were so badly damaged that it took her an hour to drag herself down the stairs and to the toilet, and that her body was so badly beaten it was starting to give off a rotten smell, which caused the boys to lose interest in her even more. Junko's torture could have only lasted 16 days if they've had of investigated when they had phoned when she had contacted the police, but it didn't. It continued. Ihara, one of the kidnappers' friends, had been forced to rape Junko, and he had told his brother about the incident, and then they had decided to go to the police and tell them about Junko. So the police had arrived at Minato's house to investigate, and Minato's parents had said that there was definitely no girl in the house whatsoever, but gave them an invitation to go into the house and look. But because they had invited the police into the house to look, the police believed that there was no one in the house, so they didn't go in and look. On January 4th, 1989, the boys had challenged Junko to a game of mahjong. It's a game of solitaire, and Junko had actually beat the boys, and that did not make them happy whatsoever. So because of this, the boys decided to beat Junko even more, and they beat her with iron bars, punched her, kicked her, dropped more barbells on her stomach, and actually put 2 candles on her eyes and burned the hot wax into her eyelids. They made her stand on her feet, and they beat her legs and her feet with a stick. Beating her with the stick had actually made her legs bleed so profusely, and pus started to seep out of her legs. So the boys had put plastic bags over their hands, so whenever they beat her, they wouldn't get covered in blood or pus. After this, they had poured lighter fluid all over Junko's legs, arms, stomach and face, and they set her alight. And Junko had actually tried to put out the fire, but then she became unresponsive, and on the 4th of January 1989, Junko succumbed to her injuries and later on died that day. It was also known that Junko was on fire for 2 hours. Hiroshi Miyano and Joe Agura was arrested on the 23rd of January 1989 following the rape that had taken place in December of the other 19-year-old girl. On March 29th, 2 police officers came to interrogate them after finding a woman's underwear in Miyano's house, and here they confessed to the torture and rape of Junko, as they thought it was Junko's underwear that was found. So they confessed to the crimes of Furuta and told the police where to find her body. However, the police were so confused because they were actually questioning about another woman. The next day, the police had found a drum containing Junko's body, and they used her fingerprints to identify that it actually was Junko. So the boys had actually wrapped Juno's body up with blankets and put it in a travel bag and dumped her body in a 55-gallon drum and filled it with wet concrete. On the 1st of April 1989, Joe Ogura was arrested for another sexual assault on another woman, and then was later re-arrested again for the murder of Furuta. And Hiroshi and Watanabe and the rest of the boys was also arrested as well. Despite the boys' horrendous crimes, the court decided to not release the boys' names or faces. However, a magazine had stated, given the severity of the crime, they did not deserve the right to anonymity, and they had also released the names and faces of the boys. All the boys had pleaded guilty to committing bodily harm that resulted in death instead of pleading guilty to the murder of Junko Furuta. For perpetrators, they were done as juveniles because they weren't adults, but later they were resentenced as adults, but however they are now released from prison. The leader of the crime, Hiroshi Miyano, was given 17 years and the other boys was given 7. However, Hiroshi had appealed his sentence to the High Court and the judge had increased his sentence by 3 years, and the same judge had increased other boys' sentences by 2 years. It was also said that Hiroshi's family had to compensate Junko's family, so they had to pay 50 million yen, which translates to 425,000 US dollars. So they didn't have the money for this, so they actually had to sell their family home in order to compensate the family of Junko Furuta. Yaushi Watanabe was released in August 1999, however 5 years later he was rearrested in July 2004 for 7 years after beating a boy so severely because he thought he was trying to lure his girlfriend away from him. All the sentences were largely considered far too lenient for the crimes that they had committed, and all 4 individuals were protected by the special provisions applicable to individuals over 18 years of age, and they also were able to change their names. The funeral for Junko Furuta had taken place on the 2nd of April 1989, and one of her friends had spoke and read at her funeral, and they had said, "Jun-chan, welcome back. I have never dreamed that we would see you again in this way. You must have been in so much pain, so much suffering. The happy we all made you from the school festival looked really good on you. We will never forget you. I have heard that the headmaster has presented you with a graduation certificate, so we graduated together, all of us, Jun-chan. There is no more pain, no more suffering. Please rest in peace." And that is the very, very horrendous crimes that was afflicted onto Junko Furuta. She suffered 44 days in hell, and I believe that the sentences that them boys got was way too lenient. So yeah, that is the case of Junko Furuta. This murder was really, really hard to talk about. It was just very disturbing for me reading and researching, but I felt like it hasn't been covered enough by other people, so I felt that I had to share her story and get her story out there. That is the end of my murder for this week, and I will see you all again next week for another video. Bye!